Texas Lutheran University.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Pam Johnston. I'm a professor of English here at Texas Lutheran University, and on behalf of the university, I want to thank everybody for joining us here tonight. We're really excited to have such a great turnout for Dr. Grandin. If I could ask you to just take a moment to check your cell phones, be sure they're either turned off or turned to silent so we don't have any distractions for our speaker tonight or for the people who are sitting near you. I would appreciate that. I am deeply honored to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Temple-Grandin. Her achievements are remarkable, not only because they demonstrate her deep compassion for the people and the animals with whom we share this planet, but also all the more so because she began her life as a child with autism at a time when autism was not well understood. She didn't speak at all until well into her childhood. Nevertheless, her mother refused to have her institutionalized, and after many hours of speech therapy and intensive teaching, she was able to learn to speak. As a teenager, though, she endured constant teasing by her peers. Still mentored by her high school science teacher and her aunt on a ranch in Arizona, Dr. Grandin was motivated to go to college and pursue a career as a scientist and a livestock equipment designer. She obtained her bachelor's degree at Franklin Pierce College in 1970, her master's degree in animal science at Arizona State University in 1975, and in 1989, Dr. Grandin was awarded her PhD in animal science from the University of Illinois. She currently teaches at Colorado State University. Half of the cattle in North America are handled using equipment that Dr. Grandin designed for meat processing plants. Think about that for a minute. Think about how many hamburgers and steaks we consume in this country, how much brisket we consume here in Texas. Think about all those cows. Half of those cows work through equipment designed by Dr. Grandin. That equipment is specifically designed to reduce the stress and anxiety that animals experience, as well as to prevent a wasteful loss of animal life. Just as importantly, Dr. Grandin has worked to develop animal welfare guidelines for the meat industry. She has worked with companies like McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King. Over this past weekend, watching the HBO movie based on Dr. Grandin's life story, I was particularly struck by one statement that appears both in the film and in her book, The Way I See It, A Personal Look at Autism and Asperger's. Nature is cruel, Dr. Grandin writes, but we don't have to be. This applies, of course, both to our treatment of livestock and to our treatment of each other. Think for a moment about the kind of casual cruelty faced every day by people who are labeled as strange or weird or different, whatever word gets used. Whether that difference is due to autism or a learning disability or a physical disability or just that person's way of being in the world, we are pretty quick to label those people as weird and push them aside because they make us uncomfortable. And as a species, we human beings are not very good at dealing with difference. But Dr. Grandin is here this evening to talk to us about what happens when we decide instead to value minds that work differently, to value people who are different from us. Because that's when the world actually has a chance to become a better place, maybe a little kinder place for all of us. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Temple-Grandin.
Great to be here. Lots of things to talk about tonight. You know, when I was a little kid, I had all the full-blown symptoms of autism. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. You got to start working with these kids. Worst thing you can do with a kid who's 3 that's not talking is to do nothing with them. That's absolutely the worst. You got to interact with them. You got to teach them how to take turns. That's super important. They got to learn how to wait and take turns. You just can't, and if you can't get services, then you're going to have to get some grandmothers or somebody, you know, to work with these kids. You got to work with them. Uh-oh, I want to make sure, hopefully this is, wait a minute, is this, wanted to back up there. This is not working very well. Okay, you know, when I was young, I used to think that everybody thought the same way I did. You know, everyone thought in pictures. And you might wonder, well, what is thinking in pictures? All my thoughts are pictures. Like I say a word, I see pictures. And if I don't have pictures, then I'm not able to think. And it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I really started understanding that maybe other people don't think the same way. This has been a really interesting journey for me, and I want you to be thinking about, you know, different ways that people think. And, you know, you get into all these labels, autism, dyslexia, ADHD. A lot of these things like autism, it's a continuum. Half of Silicon Valley's got autism. You wouldn't have any computers without autism. Mozart had autism. Einstein had no language until age 3. But the thing is, you go out to Silicon Valley, and I've been there. I've been to major tech companies. And when you talk to the human resources people, they go, oh, but we don't talk about it. Avoid the labels, and they don't talk about it. But it's a continuum of traits. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got very severe autism. Maybe the person remains nonverbal and cannot dress themselves. And the problem you've got with a lot of these psychiatric labels is they're half based in science, and the other half is based in doctors fighting around conference room tables. And I'm saying that absolutely seriously. So don't get so hung up on it. We got to be looking at what's a kid capable of. And Mother had a good sense of knowing how much to stretch me. There's a tendency to overprotect and coddle these kids. And when I was 8 years old, I was party host at my mother's parties. Another thing that helped me is a 50s upbringing. Manners were taught. And they used teachable moments. You know, if you picked up your spinach with your hands, they didn't scream no, they said use the fork. That's called a teachable moment. And I remember the day in elementary school where I went like that on the chocolate ice cream, and the teacher just picked it up and said, you're not a dog, and I didn't get it. You know, that's teachable moments. I never forgot that. Okay, you know, you wonder what would happen to these guys today? Little Stevie? You know, what would happen to Albert Einstein today? I'd be worried that maybe he'd get put on too many medications and wouldn't be able to think at all. You know, what I've noticed is I go between skilled trades. I've worked on every single one of these major meatpacking plants. You got your Cargill, Tyson, and JBS Swift. They've all got my center track restrainer system. I worked in some of these plants when they were putting this equipment in. And I've worked with a lot of skilled tradespeople that I know are on the spectrum. Really smart, skilled trade people. Then you go out to the Googleplex, or you go out to Microsoft, or you go out to some other company, and there's all kinds of Asperger guys out there. And then I go over to a gifted conference, and I'm seeing the same geeky little kids going down a really good path. Then they have a seminar at the gifted conference on social problems in gifted kids. They're the same kids. But the problem is people get too hung up on these labels and just locked into these labels. Well, let's not get so locked into labels. Now, I hope this thing is going to, wait a minute, now I just made the slides disappear. This thing, okay, when you look at personality traits, it's sort of like a music mixing board. In fact, the way genetics is, they're learning in genetics today, you know, just imagine each slot is for another trait. Anxiety, maybe mathematical ability, visual thinking ability, the tendency to be social. These are continuous traits. It isn't like having tuberculosis where you have it or you don't. It's not that simple. And here's one of my facilities for a big meatpacking plant. And when I design things, I can test run it in my head. I used to think everybody could test run things in their head. And since I was so awkward at interviews, the way I used to sell jobs is I would show people pictures and drawings. I would show off my portfolio. I had to learn how to sell my work rather than myself. Well, now today you can put your work on your phone, and you never know where you're going to meet the right person that can open up a door. Well, I seem to be having a lot of trouble with this remote here. That's one of my drawings. And when I first started out, another big problem I had is that I was a girl going into a man's world. That was a much bigger problem than the autism. And they really did put bull testicles on my car. That happened. Really did happen. And when I went to one of my very first ag engineering meetings, nobody wanted to talk to me because I was weird. And then I pulled out my drawings, and then I got respect. And when I was in high school, I got teased, and I started crying when I heard the guy from the Imitation Game movie telling about how he was 16 years old and he wanted to commit suicide. You know, don't torture and tease the kids that are different. I'm pretty sure he's on the spectrum. Little jerky, you know, a little bit of the speech wasn't quite right. That guy's on the spectrum. Well, now he's standing there at the Oscars. He's undiagnosed, of course. And, there's a lot of people that are like that. And I want to see people being successful. And we got to deal with the bullying. You know, and then all the bullying online. You know, I had some refuges away from bullying when I worked with other students doing shared interests, like horseback riding or electronics lab. It's so important to get these kids doing things like robotics or raising farm animals or the chess club or the theater or the band, because these are refuges away from the bullying. This is where the teachers need to get in there and stop the stuff that's going on online. You know, there's too often parents will rush and say, well, my little Tommy wouldn't have written that horrible stuff on Facebook. And I go, oh, yes, he did. That's when you need to cancel his Facebook account. That's the way it would have been handled in the 50s. But you see, in the 50s, it wasn't screaming and yelling. They would just give the instruction. They'd use the teachable moments. And other parents corrected me, too. And when you went in Miss Edson's toy store, you didn't touch anything in there. And she had glasses with rhinestones on them and chains hanging down on the side, and you didn't mess with her. She'd mess with you. Now, I used to joke around that I had a big visual thinking circuit in my head, and it turns out I do have a big visual thinking circuit, and it's bigger than the controls. And there's another view of it right there. There is an art professor. There's a scan that I found I run into of one that's bigger. So mine's probably in the top 20%, but it's an art professor with a PhD. Now that is a circuit in the brain for speak what you see. It's a fiber cable bundle. That's a normal one. Now I'm going to show you what mine looks like. I've got a lot of extra branches on it. Now this circuit goes from the visual cortex to the language area, and then those branches, they go all around everywhere else in the brain. Well, that's why when you give me a key word, I get all these pictures, because that's coming out of the language area. But I pay a price for that. If you count the fibers for speak what you see, I got less of them. So I have less bandwidth for speak what you see. And I had speech delay, and I had trouble getting my speech out. Now, if you think you can go to the hospital and do these scans, don't even think about it. It's all experimental stuff. But the thing that's interesting is things that kind of showed up clinically, you know, showed up in the scans. Now, it was possible for me to learn how to talk because I still had bandwidth. It may have been a dial-up, but there was still some bandwidth. Now, this is a scan that shows that my math department pretty well got trashed and was full of water. And, yeah, algebra was a real problem. And I'm really concerned about all the algebra craziness screening out too many people. Yes, you do need to have old-fashioned, I want to emphasize, old-fashioned up through 6th grade math, because I don't know what they're teaching now. But the way they used to teach it, like in the 70s and 80s, you know, that you got to have for a lot of things. And the problem is I don't have any working memory. I don't remember verbal sequence. I have to write it down, and I still have to write it down. So then you might say, well, how do I know the sequence of a great big meatpacking plant? Because I can turn on the video recorder in my head and walk through the plant. Now, it took time to learn that. Okay, what this is right here is the 1968 IBM computer teletype terminal. I had access to this, and so did Bill Gates. And he could learn to program, and I could not. I wanted to. You know, Malcolm Gladwell says if you have enough teaching and enough resources, you can just do anything. No, I couldn't do it. I had free access to this, and I had all the teaching. I took the course. I couldn't do it. Well, that was just not going to work. Now, this is one of my most important slides, the different kinds of minds. I am a photorealistic visual thinker. All of my thoughts are pictures. And another kind of thinker is the mathematical mind. That's the kind of mind that thinks in patterns rather than in pictures. These kids often have trouble with reading. You might have a kid in 3rd grade who can really do math well. If you make him do baby math, he's going to get bored, and his behavior is going to get terrible. What you need to do is move him ahead in math, and he needs some special ed in reading. And then you got the verbal facts mind. This is the guy that knows all the facts about his favorite stuff. And there's evidence that these 2 different types of visual thinking actually do exist. In my book, The Autistic Brain, which they do have on the book stand, I got the scientific evidence that these different thinking types really do actually exist. It is evidence-based. I got you evidence-based. And there's 2 ways to do the math. You can do it the more verbal way or the more visual spatial way. And one of the big problems they got in school is they get hung up on fads. Education is just ridiculous on fads. Okay, we got to teach with phonics, teach reading with phonics, teach it with whole word. You need to teach both. Yeah, Dick and Jane's books did not work for me. Phonics did. But then there'll be another kid where phonics is absolutely horrible. Teaching math. Some kids can do it in their head. I learned the old-fashioned borrowing and subtraction where you've got to write it on the paper. I have to write it on the paper. Then we get into the arguments about handwriting. I just heard a really disgusting story about a kid who can't graduate from one stupid course because they want him to write it by hand. They won't let him type it. Well, that's like really dumb. I think in education, we got to look at what are the outcomes we want. We want kids to get out there, get good jobs, get into careers and things they really like, stay out of trouble with the law. And somebody can't graduate from college because his handwriting's messy, that's just stupid. Now, there is research. Well, there is research that having kids write stuff by hand is actually good for learning. So if the handwriting's passable, which mine was, well, then have them do handwriting. But there's somewhere there's just too many motor control problems. And let them hunt and peck on the computer. I never learned how to touch type. Now, I want to show you how the mathematical mind looks at things. This praying mantis is made out of a single sheet of folded paper. It's extreme origami. And what you see in the background is the folding pattern for making the praying mantis. That's not my kind of mind. This is the mind. This is the mind of the mathematician, of the computer programmer, the engineering kind of mind. Well, and there are some nice little origami stars that some kids just made. Next slide, please. I don't think the batteries or something will run out on this thing. And there again is one of my drawings. Always like to show those off. And then this next slide is from Grant Marnier, the eco-artist. And I can remember when I first met him, he was showing some of his artwork at an autism conference. And I said to his mom, I said, this stuff's professional grade. He's shown at professional art shows now in Texas, and now has some $6,000 commissions. Well, then the other thing that's happened with Grant, since he's been getting out doing these shows, he's gotten so much more social. You see, social skills have to be learned. You know, people say, how'd you get good at public speaking? I used to be horrible at public speaking. The first time I gave a talk in graduate school, I panicked and walked out. You have to do it. You've got to get out and do stuff. Now, this is the reason why all you algebra fanatics really need to have my kind of mind. Because the problem you got with a mathematician, and I just heard a horror story about someone living with a mathematician, and he put a roll of toilet paper on the gas stove right next to the pilot light. Well, couldn't you see that maybe that burned the house down if you did that? That's not very good. Now, what you see here is a mess you don't want to get anywhere near. That's the remains of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. And when I found out why it burned up, I'm going, how could you have done this? I can't design a nuclear reactor. The kind of function I would have had if I'd worked on this project is I would have been drawing the drawings for the concrete work for the plant. And drawing the drawings, and I would have been doing the side views and go, wait a minute, we're going to put our emergency generators and our emergency cooling pumps, these are really important things, so you don't burn up, and you put them in a non-waterproof basement. That's why it burned up. The tsunami came, the basement filled up with water, electric pump does not run underwater. Okay, now the second mistake, because you have some time, it doesn't burn up right away, you have a few days. The second mistake was purely social. They never asked for help. All they would have had to have done is pick the phone up. And I've worked years in construction. We called it the horn. They had just picked it up. The world would have been there, and they could have stopped it. It's beyond me, as somebody who's totally logical, how could you let a nuclear reactor burn up and have breach of containment, and there's still an exclusion zone around it, and the swallows are mutating in really scary ways? There's an article in the New Scientific American that's not nice. How could you let this happen? It was a visual thinking. I mean, it was a lack of visual thinking caused this. Now, the world needs all the different kinds of thinkers. One of the big problems we have in science right now is replicating experiments. And when I review scientific journal articles, I really look at the method section. I go over and I go, wait a minute, you didn't put in there what breed of pig you used. You know, so you got to do your methods so somebody else can replicate your experiment. The other fight that I've gotten into with some people is that think that the only science is a controlled experiment. Well, what's a controlled experiment for the Hubble Space Telescope? Astronomy is observation. Epidemiology is also observation. And in my work I did with animals, some of the first things I did was I noticed that animals see detail people tend to not see. Things like chains hanging down, coats on fences, the hose on the floor, people walking by. Nobody before thought to look at what cattle were seeing. All right, let's see if you're any good at observation. Raise your hand if you saw the sunbeam, the cattle looking at the sunbeam. Oh, we're doing pretty good here. You saw that. Okay, and look at how the zebra and the horse have an ear on each other. And this is one of my meat packing plants. This thing is just going all over the place. One of my meat packing plants. And if you want to see how this works, you can look up beef plant video tour with temple-grandin. There's also pork plant video tour with temple-grandin. And you can see there's a lot of complicated stuff. And we need to be getting a little more respect for the skilled trades. I'm not talking about putting sheetrock up. That's only semi-skilled. But you get into the real high-end skilled trades, and the oil industry has shortages of people, and diesel mechanics, auto mechanics. You know, for some of these kids, that's where they need to go. Not everybody, but I've done a lot of work with skilled trades. It was some of the most funnest stuff I ever did. All right, I got an honorary doctorate at Texas A&M, and I met this really neat lady named Dr. Watson. She's the provost there, and I was very happy that I passed the engineering ethics test. And the problem is most people overthink this. So this heavy tool gets dropped on the wing of an airplane. It stresses the metal close to the critical limits. What do you do? All right, you can think about that. All right, let you look at the factory. What would you do? Don't overthink this. Okay, I want someone down there on the floor to tell me what you would do. Okay? You remove the tool, you've just failed it. It will stress the metal close to critical limits. You replace and destroy the parts that were stressed. And I said, yeah, you don't use it, referring to the parts. That's the correct answer. Well, your answer's not the worst one I got. I was at another meeting, and you know what one person said? And they were looking at this, I'm going, you gotta be joking. You prop up the wing. I mean, really? That's gonna take off and it's gonna fall off. See, the problem is you're overthinking it. You don't use the part. And then, what Karen said, and I thought this was really, really interesting, is 10 years ago, 90% of the students who say you don't use a part, now only 60% of the students say you don't use the part. And they try to calculate it. You see, you take the kids with just the high math scores, they try to calculate it to death, instead of saying, well, you just throw it away. Now, I'm visualizing, yeah, we're going to throw it away, but I'm going to personally supervise destruction of the part. Because I've been around too many things like this. I don't want that part put in another airplane. So if it's a small part, I'm personally going to wreck it with a hammer, and if it's something big, I'm going to supervise having it destroyed in a press or something. You know, take some hydraulics and we'll destroy it. Okay, Steve Jobs was an artist. When you look at your iPhone, there's Steve Jobs, and then there's an article in the New Yorker magazine. I think the guy's name is Ives. He's the head designer for Apple. It's all about art at Apple. And then the engineers have to make the inside of the phone work. But art, when you use your phone, what the case feels like, Ives did the case, all that stuff, swiping and all that stuff like that, that was all thought up by an artist, by an industrial designer. That's the kind of job, you know, that I did with the cattle. So I'm an industrial designer for cattle. Now, the other thing these kids have got to do is they got to learn how to do what the boss wants them to do. This is where they got to learn work skills. 13, mother got me a sewing job. 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. When I was getting my master's degree, I was painting signs at the Arizona State Fair for this really stupid Himalayan monster exhibit. And my nephew's an industrial designer. I'll tell you what his first project was. He works for Modco, M-O-D-K-O. And he designed the shake potty. And when it was under development, its code name was dog poop computer bag. I can't even think about computer bags. It's like an aluminum TSA compliant computer bag. Little Fifi does her business on that. You can look it up on it's for people that live in apartments in New York, the Modco shake potty. Remember, it's K-O. Now, do you think that's a project that he really wanted to do? I'm going to go to college, I'm going to learn how to design that. Well, he also did a nice headphone stand, too. But you know, it's called work. You do have to do the projects your boss wants you to do. And some of these kids haven't learned that skill, and we need to be teaching that. Middle school. How about Thursday night church social? He's got 100 chairs to put them up nice and straight, and 100 chairs to take down, put them away on the racks. Do it every Thursday. Yes, it's volunteer, but it's a job. It's on a schedule. You've got to do it, and too many of these kids are not learning it. And the other big problem I'm seeing is too many video game addictions. I'm hearing he's 21, he's on Social Security. That's ridiculous. No, he's 21, he needs to be working at Caterpillar. There's a lot of jobs in there. And the thing that's nice about that is you can get a job on the assembly line, there's no academic barrier, and you're good enough, you'll end up in the machine shop. You know, I looked at, last night we toured around, I asked for a factory tour. You know, I just look at places like that, I think jobs, opportunities. We also have to look for back doors, because a lot of these kids are really awful at interviews. We got to like grease the skids and just get them into places, get people to just try them. Then they're going to find out they like them. Now, I thought this was good. You know, some people think humanities are not important, and David Baresh from the Chronicle of Higher Education said the connection between Steve Jobs and so-called useless humanity classes such as calligraphy should not be ignored. And there's also evidence that if you study some of the great literary fiction, it can help with social skills. This is in Science, Primary Science Journal. Yes, engineers is a place for doing some of the classics. And when I went to Franklin Pierce College, I go, why do I have to take this stupid world literature course? Turned out I ended up loving it. The teacher was so interesting in explaining, you know, what the author was trying to convey in the story. Now, there's evidence that language covers up visual thinking because of the type of Alzheimer's that as language parts of the brain are wrecked, art talent comes out for a while. And when Van Gogh was painting Starry Night, I don't think he realized he was putting mathematics into this, because the mathematicians got a hold of this and said, oh, it's got mathematics in it. I go, oh, trippy. Now, this is one of my really, really important slides. Bottom up. My thinking's bottom up. When you think in words, you tend to be top down. This is why people get locked into labels. Top-down thinkers overgeneralize when they are troubleshooting and problem solving. And it doesn't matter whether that's for, okay, labels on kids, dog behavior problems, or problems over at the Tyson chicken plant. They tend to overgeneralize. Now, if the kid's 3 years old, I can give you a canned speech about early intervention. But once they get older, I have to know a lot more. Let me give you an example of overgeneralizing dog behavior problems. I had somebody at a conference ask me, I have a crazy dog, how do I fix that? I don't know what a crazy dog is. So I'm visualizing a little white fluffy thing jumping on somebody because he's happy, something big and scary, biting somebody. So one could be, a crazy dog might be aggressive, or a crazy dog might be a happy little jumpy thing. I have to have more information in order to answer that question. There's a tendency to overgeneralize. Now, when you think bottom up, concepts are formed with taking specific examples, taking specific pictures, putting them into file folders in my head. Now, to make bottom-up thinking work, you got to fill up the internet that's in the head with a ton of web pages. So the Google that's in your head has something to search. This is why you got to get these kids out doing things. There's a tendency to overprotect them. No, you got to get them out there, getting them out doing things so that they have information to search. So how do you learn a concept like up or down? Well, a plane goes up in the air. A person jumped up in the air. I went up the stairs. Use a bunch of specific examples. That's just an example of things like the position words. Bottom-up thinking. If you're a language-based thinker, you got to fight the way you think. My thinking is also associative. It's not linear. Okay, so I've met the Chicago terminal airport. Yep, there's a Chinese restaurant there that's so-so. There's a French restaurant there that has a whole thing of garlic bread they give you that's like so good I ate the whole loaf. So now I'm worrying about, this. I poured like a half bottle of olive oil on it with Parmesan cheese and Concourse, B as in Bravo, United Airlines. Or I can start searching my memory for glass structure pictures or airport pictures. So you got the biosphere, you got the Crystal Palace, you got our greenhouse, which they're adding on to right now, and the construction company took a whole bunch of our precious parking spaces. Not happy about that. Or I could get into the airport category. How about Dallas-Fort Worth? That doesn't handle ice very well. How about the Minneapolis airport? I was just up there. The Atlanta airport's a joke with 3 inches of snow, complete joke. Got stuck in that last year. So now I'm starting to getting associations of some of my experiences, some of these different places. And then, of course, you got great old garbage in New York. When I asked a physicist think about a church steeple, instead of getting pictures the way I get it, he got motion of people singing and stuff. I'm going, wow, trippy, trying to make patterns out of church steeples. Now, animals are very, very specific in how they think because they think in pictures, they think in smells, and they associate audio files and pictures and smells with emotions. Dogs communicate a lot with tone of voice. There's been a lot of interesting research on that. But when an animal thinks specifically, it's important to train your cattle to be calm around both the person on a horse and the person on the ground. Because if he only sees the person on the horse, the first time he sees a person on the ground in a confined area, they're going to panic. You see, it's a different picture. You see, it's specific when it's sensory-based thinking. Okay, categorizing behavior problems. I find people have a lot of trouble trying to figure out, do I have a biology problem or a behavior problem? Do I have a people training issue, or is there something wrong with the design of the equipment? Yeah, that's one thing I've learned, so they can figure out how to either break it or get hurt on it. People are really not too smart about that. But I find that in troubleshooting, whether it's in factories or whether it's with a kid's behavior problem, they have a hard time categorizing problems. Like, do I have a nonverbal kid that's got a hidden painful medical problem, and that's why he's pitching a fit? Got to figure it out. Well, there's the happy geeks. And the guy there with the long gray hair, before he became the navigator for the Mars rover, he was a theater major. Well, for a lot of these kids that are different, theater is just absolutely a great thing for them to be in. You got to stretch these kids. You got to stretch them just outside their comfort zone to get them to do things. You know, I had a great science teacher in college, all kinds of great projects, and I got motivated to study when I had a goal of becoming a scientist. And you absolutely cannot allow these kids to become recluses in their room. That's one place where my mother and the headmaster of my boarding school drew a line in the sand. And when I didn't want to go to Friday night movie night, I had a choice. I could become projectionist, or I could sit in the audience, but not going. That was not going to be an option. You've got to pull their butt out of their room, and they've got to get out and do stuff. Kids don't do enough free play. And I had a very interesting conversation with a lady who had a big walnut orchard, and she'd have 11-year-old kids come out to go to a summer camp. And in the afternoon, they had 3 hours or so of free play in the walnut orchard, and they didn't know what to do with themselves, especially the boys. Moping around, phone and video game withdrawal. And after 2 days of electronics withdrawal, they discovered free play. And they discovered that they really liked it and wanted to come back next summer. And I was just reading in a magazine, there's now been a study done on this. They came up with exactly the same results. You know, taking the hands-on classes out of the schools is the worst things the schools ever did. If I hadn't had art class and sewing class and woodworking class, I would have just gone nowhere. You know, hands-on classes, that's what I was all about. My ability in art was always encouraged. And I was encouraged to do lots of different things in art, not just the same thing over and over again. There's the things that kept me going. If I hadn't had those things, I don't know what would have happened to me. And I always did lots of building projects. Didn't do much studying in my boarding school. It cost a lot of money to go there. So I could clean horse stalls, shingle the barn roof, and refix up our ski tow house. But I think what the headmaster realized is I was learning work skills. You know, we got to limit screen time, about an hour a day. And okay, they're addicted to Minecraft. Let's work on tying that back to the real world. One mom got a bunch of boards cut up and had the kids paint them and sand them so they had Minecraft blocks. You know, then you can get online and you can get these, print out all this stuff to make Minecraft costumes. Well, if I have anything to do with it, they're not going to print it out. I mean, we're going to use up an entire $75, $100 printer cartridge to print out these pieces of paper to glue on boxes? No way. They can look at the pictures online and they're going to do it with poster paints. And they're going to find it's a lot more fun doing it the old-fashioned way. Then they can have the Minecraft birthday party, but we're not printing anything out. We're not wasting printer cartridges for that. That's just stupid. And let's work in turn-taking. You see, a lot of these kids can't inhibit a response. They get these different labels, ODD, conduct disorder, all these awful labels. And some of this is because they can't inhibit a response. They've got to learn how to wait and take their turn. Absolutely have got to. You know, 4-H, FFA, great activities. And you've got lots of that here. And you take the fixation, the thing the kid's fixed on, expand it, broaden it. I would have just drawn the same horse head over and over again. Or the kid likes trains. Well, let's draw the train station. Let's draw a place the train goes to. You see how I'm making an associative link? And you can tap into that fixation on trains to motivate work. Now, here are all kinds of free online sources for things like programming. They got the right price, they're free. Khan Academy, K-H-A-N, Khan Academy. Code Academy, that's free programming. Udacity, that's programming classes. Wolfram Mathematica is a really fun mathematics site. There's all kinds of free stuff online. You just got to look for it. You know, people don't Google stuff. I can't believe number of emails that get sent to my webpage where people ask, what do I do when I have a kid with autism? Well, the first thing maybe you need to do is join your local support group. They'll write to me and say stuff like, well, how do I find programs? Well, I don't know. I'm getting an email from hotmail.com. I have no idea where they're located. How could I even begin to advise them on anything? I just tell them to join their local support group. they don't think to go to Google and look that sort of stuff up. Well, when I was in high school, I really got into optical illusion rooms. That was shown in the movie. You got to show kids interesting stuff to get them interested in it. And I get asked, well, how did I get interested in the cattle industry? Because when I was 14, mother got remarried. My stepfather's sister had the ranch. You see, and then I was an Easterner, went out west to Arizona, and was exposed to it. Kids don't get interested in stuff they're not exposed to. And I think a lot of kids today, with all this crazy testing stuff, they're not getting exposed to enough career options to kind of figure out what they want to go into. And there's one of my facilities drawn in SketchUp. Free, it's free. You can get it online, it's a free 3D drawing program. And then if you have a 3D printer, you can print it out with the 3D printer. And the thing that's good about 3D printers is you now are joining the virtual world back to the mechanical world. This thing's like a glue gun that goes around like this. I think it's interesting that the website warns you that you have to have patience to use this. Because the 3D printer itself is not electronic. It's controlled by electronics. But the little thing that moves around, it is a mechanical device. And it's a delicate little mechanical device that you have to be patient and careful with. Well, I went to a gifted conference, and it made me so happy to see all these little kids put away the electronics and look at things under the Brock Magiscope. It's a wonderful little children's microscope. It's really easy to use. They were putting pond scum under it, and flower petals, and leaves, and insect wings, and looking at that stuff, getting really excited about it. And this is an interesting study on reading comprehension. You know, you need to read to kids. There's a lot of research right now, you know, that you get kids exposed to a lot of different vocabulary words, and you talk to kids. And kids need to be talking to real live people, not to videos. It doesn't teach the same way. And when you read to kids a book, the paper book worked better than the enhanced ebook. Because the problem you have with the enhanced ebook is they want to click on the links, or if you do use an electronic book, it needs to be a plain, boring one that just displays the text and the pictures with no doodads to click on. Because they pay attention to that, and then they don't pay attention to the book. Went out to Pixar, that was really fun. You got to touch to perceive. I find a lot of Pixar's found problems with drawings. They got to get them off the computers and draw some stuff by hand. And in the meat industry, I watched the meat industry go from hand drafting to CAD, and strange mistakes started showing up on drawings. And I got them for every single major meat company. Some young kid, 22 years old, took the 2-year community college course, never drawn by hand, never built anything. They're not seeing their drawings right. You got to touch to perceive. We need to be looking for people that can mentor kids. There's a lot of retirees now from all kinds of fields, and when they get bored with retirement stuff, maybe they'd like to do a small engine repair class for middle school. We need to be hooking kids on stuff like that in middle school. You know, maybe do an art class or do a sewing class. I took sewing, I loved it. Oh, I think this country, we need to get getting an emphasis back on doing real things. You know, when you think about big amounts of money like the 2008 bailout, that was equal to 2 Denver airports for every state. I like to think of big sums of money like how many airports worth of money it is. Then I can get my head around that. Well, employers, they want people that can, you know, communication skills, you know, people that have internships, know how to work. Well, now I just seem to be having a lot of trouble with this thing today. I think we'll just end the slides there. It just doesn't seem to be working very well. I think I can pretty well remember what I was talking about. In this country, we need to get back to doing real things. I was a child of the 50s. I mean, we really did stuff. Maybe before I talk about that, I need to discuss some of the sensory problems. You get kids that are dyslexic, kids that have ADHD, autism, learning problem, unspecified whatever, and you might have a kid with sound sensitivity. Can't stand getting in a really noisy place. Another kid, when he goes to read, the print will jiggle on the page. Just can't tolerate that. And these sensory issues are very variable, from mild to really severe. One kid's got hearing problems, another kid needs a quiet place to work, another kid might need some extended time on tests, but there's some real problems with the sensory system. And there's some accommodations that may have to be made for that. And one of the places where they really need to do research is good ways to desensitize sensory issues. And there's a very interesting paper online. It's called Environmental Enrichment is an Effective Treatment for Autism. Now it's done as an adjunct. Environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. So you can remember 3 key words: autism, environmental enrichment. You can find the paper. And it's a method where you stimulate 2 senses at once. Like maybe use different aromatherapies, and you might be touching carpet. Or you're listening to classical music, and you've got your hand in warm water or something. And the other thing is, you're always changing the stimuli. That's the other important thing, always, always changing it. Well, I've done a lot of thinking about how the construction industry has affected how I think, and I'm not going to be able to show you my slides of the beginning of my first jobs. I can't seem to get this thing to work now. And I didn't realize until just a couple of years ago just how much the construction industry affects how I think. You see, when you design things, I'd sell the client the job, I would design a job, then I'd supervise building the job, and then I'd go to the feed yard or the packing plant and I'd have to start the job up and make that piece of equipment work, train the staff how to use it. You see, it's all about finishing jobs. See, I think one of the big problems they got with all this theory and stuff like this is they don't actually think about how are we going to implement something. You got to finish jobs. And if you're in education, getting jobs finished is having a kid go out and be successful, stay out of trouble with the law, get and keep a good job that's above entry level, have a life, you know, maybe get married, have kids, whatever, you know, that's having a good outcome. Also, as a child of the 50s, we built stuff, we did stuff. We went to the moon. We built the interstate highway system. We got things done. And I think today we've lost some of that. I travel around the country, infrastructure's falling apart. No, when the kind of kids that could solve some of these problems, they're down in the basement playing video games, and that's not where they ought to be. And I think I want to finish up before we go into the question period that we need to be getting back to doing real stuff. That's what we need to be doing. And well, we got some mics there. And right here at the floor, right there, there's a mic in each corridor. And I'd like to use the mics. And I'm going to pick somebody if nobody wants to ask some questions. Okay, you're going to have to go up to the mic. And you know what? Mom can't answer the question. You have to ask it. Okay, take the mic off the stand. Okay, oh, good, you can get it down. Okay. Yeah, you're going to find out you can talk to lots and lots and lots of people.
Okay. My question is, since I have a little brother, well, me and him don't really like most of the same stuff except for Minecraft, but but when I get home, I sometimes need a break from reality, so I have a question. What do I do?
Well, I'm not suggesting totally eliminating playing video games. Let's just go back to what our rules for television were back when I was a child. 1 hour during the weeknight and 2 hours a day on the weekend. So we're still going to have some video games. I'm not suggesting banning them.
Okay.
But you've got to limit it. Because now if you want to spend 8 hours learning how to program a game, that's a different thing. But what I'm seeing in a lot of these kids is they're not going into the industry and learning to program games. That's not what's happening. And no, and I'm not, suggesting we don't do these things at all. But I'm seeing too many smart kids, and I'm seeing especially a problem with this with the mathematician type boys, and they're not going and getting those good jobs at Google. And interesting enough, Silicon Valley parents control the electronics use. Even though they make all the electronics, they don't let their kids play video games all day, unless they want to do programming. Yep, that starts in about 3rd grade. That's how they get those good jobs. Okay, maybe somebody else has a question. If you just say it really loud, then I can repeat. Okay, you're welcome. Maybe you just hand the mic Why don't we just hand the mic to him, it'll be easier.
I have a little cousin who has Asperger's, and she's been able to increase socializing a little bit through her artwork and putting it on Instagram, and she has over, I think, 800 followers or so. And she's been able to socialize a little bit more.
Well, that's good. I mean, this is an example. I'm not suggesting getting rid of electronics. And if you're using a site, social media type thing like that to share art and do things with art, that's good.
But she's only been able to do it, she's only been able to socialize more over technology and not as much in person.
Well, okay, it's okay to do some socializing over technology, but she's also going to have to learn to do it with people. And we got to kind of fight the recluse in the room thing. Maybe she could Skype with some of these people, but you still need to be doing face-to-face contact too. How old is she?
She's 13.
She's 13. And the other thing, when you're putting stuff up online, you've got to look at that. That's your portfolio. I cringe at if the internet had been around when I was in my teens, the garbage I would have put up online. And you want to make sure you just only put good stuff up there, and you don't put up bad stuff, because now you can't get rid of it. Right. We did naughty bad stuff when we were kids, but it never ended up online.
Okay, so basically it would be better for her if she started
I'm not saying get rid of the Instagram stuff,
right.
But if she likes art, maybe let's get her in a live art class.
She's tried that when she was younger. I'm not sure if she's still taking them. As far as I know, she's only doing it through the school.
Well, get her in a separate art class. I took a sewing class that the local sewing machine store had, and I had it on weekends. I loved it.
Okay.
Just get involved. Just find things in the neighborhood. And the sewing class was either free or it was real inexpensive, because the sewing store wanted to sew sewing machines and sewing supplies and things like that. But I had friends through horseback riding, Model Rocket Club. I really made a hit when I made a rocket of our headmaster. And he flew. I only put the smallest engine in him because I didn't want to lose Mr. Patey. But then,
okay.
just get her out there doing things.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Grandin, my name is Amina Bahloli, and we do have a San Antonio Adults with Asperger's support group for those who are interested. I'm one of the co-founders, so if you're interested, for anybody who wants to know, we do have a support group, and out of the group, we have 10 of us that came out from San Antonio. We would like to get a picture later on after the...
Oh, that'll be absolutely fine. I'd be happy to do that.
And thank you for coming out to share your thoughts with us about Asperger's and autism, and feel free to, we have a Facebook page we can give you, and there is an article about myself, if you want to know.
And what do you do?
I work at a security organization called Contemporary Services Corporation.
Well, and I want to compliment you. have a job.
Yeah. And
you're keeping your job, and that's really good.
And I actually have 2 jobs.
Okay.
So I'm happy at West Telemarketing. But I'm happy to have one. But we'll gladly get a picture with you after everything's over. Thank you for coming out, Dr. Grandin.
Okay.
Before I asked, thank you so much for coming out to speak, Miss Grandin. We've heard a lot about you, and me and my friends were such huge fans. I'm Arthur Trickett-Weil, and I'm autistic, and I was wondering, I'm probably going to be volunteering this summer at a camp for children with severe autism, and I'm wondering, how would I best go about communicating with a child who has difficulty connecting in a conventional way?
Now difficulty talking or difficulty connecting socially, or when you say severely, you're talking about nonverbal individuals with autism.
I'm preparing for that, yes.
Okay.
So, for example, a child that has a general difficulty with attention, how would one go about getting the attention of that child?
In other words, you can't get his attention
Yes.
at all.
Yes.
Okay, one of the things you got to be careful when they're shutting the world out, they sometimes shut the world out because they're on sensory overload. Okay, let's say you take the kid to the middle of the gigantic supermarket. There's two ways to react to that: screaming big fit,
Right.
or just shut down, just completely shut out the world. And I did that. My ears were kind of like a microphone and had two settings: on, super loud, or off. And some of these kids, you need to get them in a real quiet place. Also, some of them are mono-channel. They cannot see and hear at the same time. There's 3 really good books on nonverbal. There's 3 individuals that have books where they type completely independently. And one of the best ones is How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? There's also The Reason I Jump. And in How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move, Tito describes a sensory jumbled world. I think that's the best of the 3. How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move by Tito Mukapadahe, and don't ask me how to spell it.
So, just in short, isolate the senses.
Yeah,
so
a lot
right.
of these kids that are nonverbal, like Tito, for example, he learns by hearing. Hearing is his best sense for learning. He also describes a very interesting thing on learning how to just do simple things like put on a T-shirt. If someone just takes a T-shirt, yanks it over his head and quick like that, he can't feel what's happened.
going on,
It went
right.
too fast. But if they take the T-shirt and very slowly, like maybe take a full 45 seconds to slide it over the head, and then very slowly you put the arms through, then he can feel it.
Right.
Okay, we're going to need to go on to somebody else.
Thank you so much, Ms.
Okay.
Grandin.
Hi, Ms. Grandin. I have one question. First of all, I'd like to tell you that I really do like the way that you think. It's fantastic.
And are you a
to me.
student, or are you?
I'm actually, my mom teaches special ed over at A.J. Briesmeister. I believe you met with her.
Okay.
Miss Hines. I have no idea. Anyway, I had one question, and that question is, what did you want to do as your career when you were about 16 or 17?
When I was 16 or 17, I was fascinated with things like optical illusions, and I wanted to study the visual system and all of that, because I was shown that optical illusion room. And there's a scene in the movie where I actually built it. That's true.
Right.
And the teacher didn't tell me how to make it. And there was no internet for me to look it up on, so I had to figure out how to do it. Sometimes you don't know what career you want to go into until you try stuff on and you do stuff. And I think a problem we got today is kids aren't getting exposed to enough stuff. In animal fields, they either want to be a veterinarian or they want to be a marine biologist. And oftentimes there's real unrealistic expectations about this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And now around here you've got all kinds of cattle stuff, cattle ranches and things like that. But students can only get interested in stuff they get exposed to. And I think that's really an important thing.
I can see how that works.
What's your good subject in school?
I usually was good in geometry, but I didn't really make it through, I guess, English and or
All right, maybe you're a math
biology.
head. Have you ever tried computer programming?
I have not, but I am actually planning on going into automotive engineering. In
Okay, good.
Just a short minute.
And auto engineering, have you ever had auto shop?
I was in auto shop between freshman and sophomore year.
Well, I'm glad that your school still has auto shop.
Yeah,
Because
that's
one
over
of the
in- actually,
problems
that's
I'm
in New
seeing as I
Braunfels.
travel around, in my state 5 years ago, I gave a talk at school right near Fort Collins. They had just shut down auto shop,
Really?
which makes me really sick. And the thing is, if you go into automotive engineering, you've got people that go into engineering that never worked on a car.
Yeah.
And what some of the engineering schools now are realizing this, and they now have to have a class in engineering school on how to use tools.
Really?
Because they just couldn't have someone graduate from engineering school and they didn't know how to use electric drill.
But I mean, that's the serious problem. I mean, it's the phones nowadays. kids are sucked into them. I know,
You know what?
that when
There's
I got my first smartphone.
all this stuff on the phones. There's a point. Sometimes we need to have a time we get rid of this stuff. I just gave talks in 2 different English classes here, and they asked me, well, how do you get the creative spark to start writing? You got to set aside a 4-hour block of time. You get rid of all of the electronic stuff, except maybe a computer with Microsoft Word on it, and all the internet connection needs to be disabled, and you've got to just do it. And you have to set aside a long enough block of time, make yourself do it.
Yes, ma'am.
That's how I get writing done. And the computer with the internet is downstairs, and I'm upstairs doing the writing. And if I have to look something up on Google, I have to go downstairs, and then I got to come right back again because I can't have an active internet connection there next to me when I'm trying to concentrate on writing.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and let this next question
downstairs.
go up. I appreciate you for coming out.
Okay. All right, maybe just a couple more questions, and then I think we're probably going to, I don't know how we're doing on time. Okay, right there.
Hi, Dr. Grandin. My name is Candace Ayler. I'm a mom. This is my daughter, Rebecca. I have no idea what she's going to ask, but we'll figure it out. I'm also a nurse and an advocate for children's mental health in the state of Texas.
Well, and that thing, I think there's a lot of people need to watch the video clip of the imitation game guy. I was like crying. I'm pretty sure that guy's on the spectrum. Well, just look at his speech patterns.
Benedict
and he jerks a bit when they had the side view of him.
No.
Which, you know, a little motor coordination issue. And I hope a lot of people heard, a lot of people would have heard that.
I wanted to ask you a question. And I don't want this to sound insensitive or upset anyone. Because I do so much work with mental health advocacy, I've worked as a psychiatric nurse, and I have children that have those challenges.
Well, and children where they've been in abusive situations and all kinds of awful stuff.
Yeah, exactly. In our state right now, we're having to beg the legislature to put cameras in our classrooms because our children get hurt. And that's the state of the reality of our world right now for our children. So when I hear you speak and when I've watched your movie, it's got me wondering if you've ever thought about applying your vision, your way of seeing the way cattle behave, and seeing if there was a way to apply that same vision and ability to see, because the way I see it, when a child has a behavior that seems aggressive,
well, first of all, when you got to troubleshoot, the big mistake I see, people come to me and they go, what do you do about autistic behavior problems in a classroom? I don't know. I have to have a lot more information. First of all, I have some standard questions. That's age. I want to get some level of functioning here. Does he talk? You know, I'm trying to figure out what I'm dealing with here. Okay, then I want a really precise description of what the behavior is, figure out what gets the behavior started, because some of these kids, they manipulate. One thing that with me, my mother and the teacher worked together. Temper tantrum was no television for one night, and when I was throwing the temper tantrum, they never screamed at me and said, I'm going to take a TV away. You know, they wait until it's nice and calm, and they say, you know the rule, there's going to be no television. But people overgeneralize on troubleshooting these problems. And then I had a really good friend that came from an abused situation, and school was her safe haven. She went to Catholic school, and the nuns were her safe haven. And what saved her was having a safe haven at school, and then her uncle in the summertime was a safe haven, and home was horrible. I won't go into what went on there. It was just super bad. You know, but there's a tendency of people to say, well, what do we do about behavior problems in a classroom? Well, that's so overgeneralized. That's like the crazy dog thing. I'm serious. Or my horse goes berserk. That's another question I got. I found out in that situation the horse went berserk in only one situation, when you put him in those cross-tie things, because he probably had an accident in cross ties. Everywhere else the horse was perfect. Don't use cross ties. You don't have to use them. Get rid of the cross ties. That one was easy. But it was in a big conference, and I had to ask her like 5 or 6 different questions before I found out the only place this horse went berserk was in the cross ties. See, people grossly overgeneralize when they troubleshoot.
Thank you.
Okay, just a couple over here. Okay.
Yes, Dr. Grandin. I'm a parent of 2 nonverbal autistic children. Both have severe eating issues, and in your movie it shows that you only ate Jell-O
Well, the
and
reason
yogurt.
why I only ate yogurt and Jell-O is because I had colitis and everything else went through me. And so I would eat yogurt and Jell-O for maybe a week or so. You know, there were times up to 2 weeks where yogurt and Jell-O was the only thing I ate. But then when I went on antidepressant medication to control my panic attacks, it really helped the colitis a whole lot.
Okay.
And if anyone's interested in people that have extreme anxiety, whether it doesn't, not just autism, but any kind of a panic attack situation, you might want to read Thinking in Pictures and read the chapter called A Believer in Biochemistry.
Okay.
And there's some very, very interesting research now on picking out which antidepressant is going to work, because anxiety and antidepressants interact with the immune system. And there's a fascinating article in the brand new, well, I had 2 months of magazines that piled up in this mailbox, and I finally got it brought home, and I was going through it, and I can't remember whether it was last month's or this month's American Journal of Psychiatry, but an article in there where a blood test for inflammation in a standard blood test can predict whether you should take a Prozac-type drug or whether you should take an old-fashioned tricyclic like what I take. Well,
Yeah.
that's the kind of research we need.
Yeah, I was wondering if you knew of any of the eating research going on.
I didn't
because
have, you know, some of on the picky eating thing, I didn't get into that, but
Okay.
if your kid's a real picky eater, are you taking a multiple vitamin?
It's been since infancy. He vomits when there's food in his mouth. Period. He vomits
He
when they
vomits
put food on
when
the
there's food in
outside
his
of his
mouth?
mouth. Yes, even on the outside. I mean,
So
well,
he
it's gotten
can't-
to where it's in his
He can't eat at all?
at all. He's lived on Pediasure his whole life, and we've been through therapy since he was 12 months old, and
I'm going to have, this is something where, this is not autism here. You've got some other problem here if he vomits
Okay.
at everything.
Well, the Jell-O and the yogurt thing, that's why I was wondering, because my daughter also has eating issues, but she only does applesauce and yogurt.
Well, that's much more common.
And that's what I was
And you want to try to broaden that out. I hope she's taking, she's only eating applesauce and yogurt. I hope she's taking some vitamins.
Oh, yeah, I have to crush them into a fine powder and
Okay,
sneak them in
because
there.
the thing that worries me on some of this real restricted eating is the old-fashioned vitamin deficiency diseases.
The
You know,
iron
rickets
levels.
and things like that, and beriberi, and scurvy, vitamin C deficiency.
Well, thank you so much. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
All right, okay, I'll take you, and then I think we'll end there.
Hello, Dr. Grandin. Thank you for being here. My name is Angela Weddle. I'm a professional visual artist with autism and also with San Antonio adults with Asperger's. And more a comment agreeing with your line of thinking than a question. I didn't get my diagnosis until I was 29 as an adult. And at first, I was upset feeling I had been robbed of accommodations that I saw my peers get, that I met, you know, that people had gotten when they were
Well, what are you
younger.
doing now? Where are you employed at, or what are you doing?
Well, I get disability because I also have cerebral palsy, fibromyalgia,
Okay.
and 2 kneecaps out of socket. But and
Well, I hope
normally
you're
I have
selling.
a
I
walker.
hope you're selling your art and stuff. Well, you got a beautiful outfit. Did you make that?
No, I didn't. I ordered it from a catalog.
Okay. You see the thing. Now this brings up another. This brings up another thing. It's okay to be eccentric. That's fine. You're eccentric. I'm eccentric. How I dress.
I love Western shirts also.
You like Western search, but the one thing you can't be is a rude, filthy, dirty slob. And
That
there's
is
a scene in
true.
the movie where my boss slammed the deodorant down and said, "You stink, use it," and he actually did that. And I was furious at the time, and I thank him now. I thank that boss.
But my comment was, having now gotten the diagnosis as an adult, one thing I noticed, even with other members of my group and other autistic people I've met and people on the spectrum, is not having that diagnosis and being biracial and being raised in a black community. A lot of people thought autism was a white issue, and it's not. It affects everyone.
Oh, no, it's not. It goes
affects
across all
everyone.
races.
And it's not often talked about in minority communities. But now I feel like that harsh treatment I got, and I mean, I got mercilessly bullied, but I wasn't coddled. And because of that, my mother took away the TV. She took away the things. She didn't allow the temper tantrums. And I feel like some of the therapies I see autistic children getting now
I'm
is
seeing too
hampering
many.
them.
You see, on what I think I'm seeing happening, The nonverbal, real severe group, they're getting so much better now. They used to just throw them away in the institution. But the mild cases, I think of kids I went to college with that own companies, people I know in skilled trades that own companies. I know they're on the spectrum.
Yes.
Well, they were saved by that welding class. And some of those are having a better outcome than some of the kids today. Now, where an autism diagnosis gives insight to an older person is not in the job market, relationships.
I agree
have this
with
other
that.
book, Different Not Less. It's 14 old Asperger's that got diagnosed in their 40s and 50s because their relationships were all messed up, and that's where it gave real insight. And you'd have to order that book online. It's called Different Not Less. You know, the same word that was in the movie.
I still struggle with relationships. I'm very logical, and
I am too.
Most people seem illogical to me, and I don't understand.
Well, I'm
their
sort of
thought
still
processes.
appalled at how can you be so illogical that you sat in the control room and watched a nuclear power plant do breach of containment.
Yeah. Well, I'm just
through
glad
the
I'm
containment building,
Yeah.
and all the radioactive horribleness came out.
I'm just glad I'm not the one fixing the airplane, because I would have just taken that tool off, but that's not...
Well, I'm really glad that I think it's interesting that the math, you see what Karen Watson, she's a lady my age, lady in engineering, big gray braid hanging down her back, really cool lady. We talked about the problems with girls going into the industry, and the math heads flunked that test. They want to calculate, try to keep that part. No, you throw the part away. In other words, anything that came out stressed, it's trashed and destroyed.
And another brief question, speaking of math, is I have a NVLD, nonverbal learning disability, along with it.
You know what I'd want to do with you? I want to sit down with you afterwards, and I don't really want to talk about all this stuff. I want to figure out the things that you can do well. You seem to talk well. If you have cerebral palsy, it's mild.
Yes, I would love to do that, but I noticed that algebra is so abstract.
I can't do algebra,
yes,
and
algebra
I'm concerned, and I'm very concerned with all this algebra craziness is screening too many people out. And the veterinarians and doctors don't need algebra.
Yeah, and I feel like as an artist, I did not finish college just because I couldn't do
all right,
algebra.
we're going to have to go, and I want to thank everybody for coming. Now it's great having you here.
For more information, please visit tlu.edu.